I never thought money would be the thing that broke my family. Not because we had so much of it, but because of what it made us forget. The night my brother took my inheritance, I was sitting alone in my car, parked across the street from the house we grew up in. The porch light was still on. Same yellow glow. Same crooked step near the door. I had not walked up those steps in months, but I could still see them clearly, like they were burned into my mind. I remember gripping the steering wheel and thinking, this is how it ends. Not with shouting, not with slammed doors, just silence and paperwork. I had spent my whole life believing family meant protection, loyalty, the idea that even when the world gets rough, your blood would not turn against you. I was wrong about that. Dead wrong. What scared me most was not losing the money. It was realizing how long this betrayal had been planned. Because my brother did not steal from me in a moment of anger. He did it calmly, carefully, and with a smile. I found out on a Tuesday afternoon. Ordinary day, gray sky. I was drinking burnt coffee in my small kitchen when my phone buzzed with a message from a lawyer I barely remembered hiring. The subject line was short, too short. Estate distribution update. My hand started shaking before I even opened it. That is how I knew something was wrong. I had buried my father 6 weeks earlier. 6 quiet weeks of handling grief the way men like me always do. By staying busy, fixing things, avoiding long thoughts, telling myself I would deal with the pain later. I was not ready for betrayal on top of loss. The email explained everything in polite legal language. It said the estate had been settled, assets transferred, accounts closed, property reassigned. To my brother. Almost all of it. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Some typo. Some crossed wire. I read it again. Then I called the lawyer, and he did not sound surprised at all. That was the moment my chest went cold. Because when someone is not surprised by your shock, it means they expected it. He explained that my brother had power of attorney, that he had documents, that things had been signed years ago, that everything was legal. Legal. That word still makes my stomach twist. I hung up the phone and just sat there. No music, no TV, just the hum of the fridge and the sound of my own breathing. I kept thinking about my father, about the last time I saw him, about the promise he made to me when we were alone in his hospital room. You'll be taken care of, he said. I made sure of it. I believed him. That belief is what broke me. I did not cry right away. I felt hollow, like someone had reached into my chest and scooped something out, leaving a space that hurt every time I breathed. I kept asking myself the same question. How long had my brother been lying to my face? Because this was not just about money. This was about trust, about childhood, about everything we survived together and everything I thought we shared. As I sat there, memories started flooding in. Not the good ones at first. The small moments I ignored. The tension at family dinners. The way my brother always volunteered to handle things. The way he spoke for my father when my father was too tired to argue. I saw it all clearly now. Too clearly. And the worst part was this. I had known something was off for years. I just did not want to believe it. That night, parked across from the old house, I realized something else too. My brother thought he had won. He thought I was out of the picture. Quiet. Defeated. Unaware. What he did not know was that I had something he never expected. Knowledge. And patience. Because while he was busy taking everything he thought belonged to him, he forgot one thing about me. I listen. I remember. And I keep records. This story is not about revenge. It is about truth. And the cost of staying silent for too long. Let me tell you how we got here. Before I tell you how my brother took my inheritance, I need to tell you who we were before money got involved. Because nothing makes sense without that part. Families do not fall apart overnight. They crack slowly, in places you do not notice until it is too late. I grew up in a small working-class neighborhood where everybody knew everybody. The kind of place where people waved from their porches and kids rode bikes until the streetlights came on. Our house was not fancy. White siding, brown roof, a front yard that my dad never stopped fixing even though it never looked perfect. My father was not a big talker. He believed in showing up, not explaining himself. He worked with his hands. Long hours, rough palms. The smell of oil and dust always stuck to his clothes. When he came home, he would sit at the kitchen table, loosen his boots, and sigh like the weight of the whole world had been sitting on his shoulders all day. But he loved us. I never doubted that. My mother passed when I was young. Cancer. Fast and cruel. After that, it was just the three of us. Me, my brother, and my dad trying to figure out how to be a family without her. My brother was older. 5 years older. Big enough to remember her clearly. Old enough to feel responsible in a way I never was. From the outside, people thought we were close. And for a long time, we were. My brother was the loud one. Confident. The kind of guy who could walk into a room and make people listen. I was quieter. I watched more than I spoke. I learned early that staying calm kept the peace. That letting things slide was sometimes easier than fighting. As kids, he protected me. When I got picked on, he stepped in. When I messed up, he covered for me. I admired him. Trusted him. I wanted to be like him in the way younger brothers always do. My dad leaned on him too. After my mom died, my brother became his right hand. Helped with bills. Talked to contractors. Made decisions. I was still a kid, trying to understand grief, while my brother was already acting like a man. That dynamic never really changed. Even when I grew up. Even when I moved out. Even when I built my own life. My brother stayed close to my dad, and I stayed a little further back. Not because I did not care, but because I trusted that things were being handled. That trust would cost me everything. As the years went on, my father did better financially. Not rich, but comfortable. He bought rental property, saved money, invested carefully. He was proud of what he built. He used to say it was not for him. It was for us. For our future. I remember him sitting on the porch one summer evening, watching the sun go down. He looked tired, but peaceful. One day, he said, "This will all be yours and your brother's. I want you both set up right. I don't want you fighting when I'm gone." I laughed and told him not to talk like that. But he looked at me seriously. "I've seen families tear each other apart over money," he said. "I won't let that happen to you boys." I believed him. What I did not see then was how much control my brother already had. When my father started slowing down, my brother stepped in even more. He handled appointments, managed paperwork, talked to lawyers. He told me it was easier that way. That dad trusted him. That everything was under control. And I let him. Looking back, I can see the warning signs. The way my brother would brush off my questions. The way he would say things like, "You don't need to worry about that," or "Dad asked me to take care of it." At the time, it felt normal. Responsible, even. But control does not always look aggressive. Sometimes it looks helpful. When my father got sick, things changed fast. Hospital visits, medications, long conversations in quiet rooms where the air felt heavy. I showed up as much as I could, sat by his bed, held his hand, talked about old memories. But my brother was always there first, always there last. I noticed how doctors spoke to him instead of me, how nurses handed him forms, how decisions seemed to already be made before I even arrived. Once, I asked my father directly if everything was okay with the paperwork. He smiled weakly and said, "Your brother's got it. Don't stress." That smile still haunts me, because it was the same smile he used when he did not want to argue, when he was tired, when he trusted someone else to do the right thing. In his final months, my father and I had a few quiet moments alone. Just the two of us. No machines beeping. No visitors. Just silence and honesty. He told me he was proud of me. Told me he wished he had said it more. Told me he loved both his sons equally, even if it did not always look that way. Then he said something that stuck with me. "I made sure everything's fair," he said. "You won't have to worry." I asked him what he meant. He squeezed my hand. "I handled it," he said. "It's done." I did not ask more questions. I should have. But when someone is dying, you do not push. You hold on to comfort. You accept reassurance. That was my mistake. After he passed, the house felt empty in a way I cannot describe. Not just quiet. Empty. Like the walls were listening. Like memories were heavier than furniture. My brother took charge immediately. Funeral arrangements. Estate meetings. Lawyer calls. He told me to focus on grieving. Said he would handle the rest. And I believed him. We sat across from each other one night at the kitchen table, the same table my father used to sit at after work. My brother looked exhausted. Red eyes. Shaky hands. He said, "Dad wanted this to be easy for you." Those words meant something to me then. Now they make my chest tight. Weeks passed. Then months. I started asking questions. Soft ones at first. Casual ones. About the will. About the property. About timelines. My brother always had an answer. Always calm. Always reasonable. Lawyers are slow. Paperwork takes time. Trust me. So I did. Until that Tuesday afternoon. Until the email. Until I realized that while I was grieving my father, my brother was securing his future. While I was remembering promises, he was rewriting them. The hardest part was not the loss. It was the realization that the man I trusted most after my father was the one who took advantage of that trust. And even then, I still did not want to believe it was intentional. I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, a technical issue, a mistake that could be fixed. That hope kept me quiet longer than I should have been. But silence has a cost, and my brother counted on me paying it. After I read that email, I did not call my brother right away. That might sound strange. Most people would. They would demand answers. They would shout. They would accuse. But I did not do any of that. I sat still. I had learned something about grief by then. It makes you quiet before it makes you loud. It presses down on your chest and tells you to move slowly, or you might break something that cannot be fixed. I kept thinking about my father's voice, about the way he said my brother's name when he talked about responsibility, about the way he looked at me when he said everything was handled. I needed to be sure. I needed facts, not feelings. So I did the one thing my brother never expected. I started digging. At first, it was small things. Old emails, voicemails I had saved without realizing why, notes my father used to scribble and leave in drawers, dates, names, little details that meant nothing on their own but started forming a shape when you lined them up. I found an email from 3 years earlier. My brother had forwarded something to me by mistake, a lawyer's message about updating documents. At the time, I did not read it closely. I trusted him. I trusted that he would not move things around without telling me. Now I read it word by word. I noticed how my name was missing from the conversation. That was the first crack. I asked for copies of the documents from the lawyer. He hesitated. That hesitation told me more than any explanation ever could. When he finally sent them, I printed everything out and laid it across my kitchen table. It felt strange, like I was preparing for a trial instead of mourning my father. The papers were clean, professional, signed and dated. Power of attorney, asset transfers, beneficiary changes. Everything done years before my father passed. Everything done while my father was already sick. That part mattered, because sickness changes power. I remembered moments I had pushed aside, times my father seemed confused, days when he asked the same question twice, mornings when he forgot what day it was. Not all the time, but enough. Enough to raise questions. I called my brother that evening. I kept my voice calm. I asked him to explain what I was seeing. He sighed like I was bothering him. "It's all legal," he said. "Dad wanted it this way." That sentence landed wrong. Too sharp. Too prepared. I asked him why I was not included in the discussions. He said I was busy, that I did not want to deal with stress, that he was protecting me. Protecting me. I had heard that word before, from men who wanted control but needed to sound kind. I asked him if Dad understood everything he signed. There was a pause. Then he said, "Don't go there." That was the moment something shifted inside me. Because when someone tells you not to go somewhere, it means they are afraid of what you will find. I hung up without saying much. My hands were steady, but my stomach felt like it was twisting in on itself. I realized then that this was not just about inheritance. This was about power, about who had a voice when my father's was getting weaker. I did not want to fight my brother. I really did not. He was still my brother, the man who protected me when we were kids, the man who stood next to me at our mother's funeral. I kept hoping there was another explanation, but facts do not care about hope. I scheduled a meeting with another lawyer, one my brother had never spoken to. I brought everything. Emails, documents, dates, notes. The lawyer was quiet for a long time. He flipped through pages slowly, asked careful questions. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. "You might have a case," he said. Those words scared me more than anything else, because having a case meant admitting that something wrong had happened, that my father may have been taken advantage of, that my brother may have crossed a line he could not uncross. I went home that night and sat in the dark. No lights, no phone, just me and the sound of traffic outside. I felt torn in half. One part of me wanted justice. The other part wanted peace. I wondered what my father would say if he could see us now. The next few weeks were heavy. Every conversation with my brother felt different, polite, distant, like we were strangers pretending to be family. He avoided specifics. He avoided eye contact. He avoided meeting in person. That told me everything. Then one afternoon, he showed up at my place unannounced. I opened the door and barely recognized him. He looked thinner, tense, angry in a quiet way. He told me I was overreacting, that I was being manipulated by lawyers, that I was disrespecting Dad's wishes. I asked him a simple question. "Why didn't you tell me?" He did not answer. That silence was louder than any confession. I told him I had spoken to another lawyer. His face changed. Not shocked. Not confused. Threatened. "You're going to tear this family apart," he said. I wanted to laugh. Or cry. Or both. Because from where I stood, the family had already been torn apart. He just wanted me to accept it quietly. I told him I needed time. That I was not making decisions out of anger. That I needed truth. He shook his head like I was the problem. As he left, he said something I will never forget. "Be careful what you dig up." That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying memories. Moments where my brother spoke for my father. Times when my father deferred instead of deciding. Small shifts that meant everything in hindsight. I started talking to people. Neighbors. Old friends. Anyone who had been around during those years. I asked gentle questions. Did Dad seem himself? Did he talk about decisions? Did he mention changes? Some people hesitated. Others opened up. One neighbor told me my brother often spoke for my dad during meetings. Another said my father once complained quietly that paperwork was confusing lately. Piece by piece, the picture got clearer. This was not a single bad moment. This was a pattern, and patterns tell stories. By the time I filed my first formal challenge, I was exhausted. Not angry, just tired. Tired of pretending everything was fine. Tired of carrying loyalty like a weight while someone else carried benefits. When my brother received notice of the challenge, he did not call me. He sent a message through his lawyer. That hurt more than I expected, because it meant we had crossed a line neither of us could step back over easily. I still remember the day I realized this was no longer about money at all. It was about whether silence was worth the price. About whether love meant letting wrong things stand. I did not want revenge. I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted honesty. I wanted my father's voice to matter, even after he was gone. As the process moved forward, I felt something strange growing inside me. Not rage. Not bitterness. Clarity. For the first time, I stopped seeing my brother as the man he used to be. I saw him as the man he chose to become when no one was watching. And that truth hurt more than any loss of inheritance ever could. Once the legal process began, everything slowed down and sped up at the same time. Days dragged. Weeks blurred. But every letter, every call, every meeting carried weight. The kind of weight that sits in your chest and makes simple things feel hard, like eating or sleeping or even breathing right. I thought filing the challenge would bring relief. Some sense of movement. Instead, it brought a storm I was not ready for. The first thing that happened was silence. Not just from my brother, but from the rest of the family too. Cousins who used to check in stopped calling. An aunt who once said she saw me like a son suddenly had nothing to say. It was like someone flipped a switch and decided who belonged and who didn't. I learned quickly that stories travel faster than truth. My brother talked. I know he did. I don't know exactly what he said, but I could feel it in the way people looked at me when I ran into them at the store. The way conversations stopped when I walked into a room. The way sympathy felt thin and judgment felt thick. I became the brother who was suing family. That label stuck. Nobody asked me why. Nobody asked what I had found. They just assumed greed. Hurt people like simple explanations. They don't want the messy ones. I wanted to explain myself. I wanted to say this wasn't about money. That it was about fairness. About truth. About my father's voice not being erased. But the more I tried to explain, the more tired I got. So I stopped. The legal meetings were quiet and serious. Long tables. Neutral faces. Words like capacity, intent, and timeline. Everything reduced to documents and dates. It felt strange to hear my father talked about like a case instead of a man. Each time I heard his name spoken by someone who never knew him, something inside me tightened. My lawyer was careful, calm. He reminded me constantly that this would not be quick, that it would be stressful, that there was no guarantee of outcome. He asked me more than once if I was sure I wanted to continue. I told him yes every time. But late at night, alone, I was not so sure. There were moments when I wanted to quit, when I thought maybe my brother was right. Maybe I was tearing the family apart. Maybe peace was worth more than truth. Maybe letting it go would be easier. Those thoughts came when I was exhausted. When grief sat heavy. When memories of my father felt fragile. I would imagine him shaking his head, disappointed that his sons ended up here. That image hurt more than any legal threat. Then I would remember something else. I would remember how calm my father was when he said he made sure things were fair. I would remember the way he squeezed my hand. The confidence in his voice. And I would keep going. As the case moved forward, things got uglier. My brother's lawyer painted me as distant, uninvolved, a son who showed up late and questioned too much. They suggested my father trusted my brother more because I was unreliable. Reading those statements felt like being erased. I wanted to scream that I was there, that I showed up in my own way. That quiet does not mean absent. That love does not always look loud. But the system doesn't measure love. It measures proof. So I gave them proof. Emails, witnesses, medical notes, patterns. Each piece added weight. Each piece told the same story from a different angle. My father's health, the timing of the documents, the way decisions shifted. Nothing dramatic, just consistent. Consistency is powerful. At the same time, the family pressure grew heavier. I got messages telling me to stop, that I was embarrassing everyone, that dad wouldn't want this, that money was changing me. I wanted to ask them why nobody said that to my brother when he took everything quietly, but I stayed silent. Silence had become my armor. One night, weeks into the process, I sat in my car outside my apartment and just stared at the dashboard. I felt numb, empty, like I had nothing left to give. I thought about walking away, about calling my lawyer and telling him to drop everything. I imagined my brother keeping it all, the house, the money, the control. I imagined myself starting over, lighter but bitter. That image scared me, not because of what I would lose, but because of who I would become. I realized then that if I walked away, I would carry this forever. Every time I thought of my father, there would be a question mark. Every time I thought of my brother, there would be unfinished anger. I didn't want that, so I stayed. The turning point came quietly. No courtroom drama, no shouting, just a meeting. New evidence came up, medical evaluations, notes that showed cognitive decline earlier than previously stated, a timeline that no longer worked in my brother's favor. I watched my brother across the table as this information was presented. For the first time, he looked unsure, not angry, not defensive, just unsure. That moment stayed with me, because I saw something that I hadn't seen before. Fear, not fear of losing money, fear of being exposed, fear of having to explain himself without control. After that meeting, my brother asked to talk. Just the two of us. No lawyers. No witnesses. We met at a quiet coffee shop. Neutral ground. He looked older somehow. Tired. Like the weight he had been carrying was starting to show. He told me he did what he thought was right. That dad trusted him. That he was trying to protect the family. That he didn't mean to hurt me. I listened. Then I asked him why he never told me. He looked down. I knew you'd question it, he said. And I didn't want complications. That was it. Not concern. Not protection. Convenience. I told him I never wanted this fight. That I just wanted honesty. That I would have listened. That I would have worked things out if he had trusted me enough to include me. He didn't respond. When we stood up to leave, I felt something strange. Not relief. Not victory. Closure. Not because things were over, but because I finally understood who he was in this story. And who I was. That night, I went home and slept deeply for the first time in months. The storm wasn't over, but I was no longer lost inside it. After that meeting with my brother, something inside me finally gave way. Not in a loud or dramatic sense. It was quieter than that. Like a muscle that had been holding tension for too long and finally let go. I thought clarity would feel empowering. Instead, it felt heavy. Because once you see the truth clearly, you cannot pretend anymore. The days after were some of the hardest I can remember. Not because of the legal fight. That part had become almost mechanical. Calls, emails, documents, dates. I could handle those. What I struggled with was the emotional fallout. The realization that I was standing alone now, not just against my brother, but against the version of my family I thought existed. I started noticing the absence more than the presence. No messages checking in. No casual calls. Holidays passed quietly. Birthdays came and went with short texts that felt forced. I had not been pushed out loudly. I had been eased out slowly, like I barely mattered. That kind of distance hurts in a specific way. It makes you question yourself. Makes you replay conversations. Makes you wonder if maybe you really are the problem. If maybe you should have stayed quiet. If maybe peace was worth the lie. There were mornings I woke up and felt tired before my feet even touched the floor. Not physical tired. Emotional tired. The kind that settles deep in your bones. I would sit on the edge of the bed and stare at the wall, thinking about my father, thinking about how this would break his heart if he knew. That thought almost broke me. Grief has layers. Losing my father was the first. Losing my brother was the second. Losing the family I thought would stand by me was the third. Each one hit differently, but together they weighed more than I knew how to carry. I tried distracting myself. Work, Long drives. Music I hadn't listened to in years. Nothing stuck. Everything felt muted, like the world had turned its volume down. One night, I sat alone in my living room with all the lights off. Just the glow from the street outside coming through the window. I thought about quitting again. About calling my lawyer and telling him I was done. About letting my brother keep everything and walking away. I imagined how easy that call would be. Then I imagined what would come after. I saw myself years from now, sitting alone with this same ache, wondering what really happened. Wondering if my father's voice had been buried under convenience. Wondering if silence had cost me more than speaking up ever could. That was when I realized something painful but important. Walking away would not have been peace. It would have been surrender. And I had already surrendered too much in my life by staying quiet. The breaking point came unexpectedly. A letter arrived from my brother's lawyer. Cold. Formal. It questioned my intentions. Suggested my actions were motivated by resentment. It implied I was unstable. That letter did something I didn't expect. It made me angry. Not loud anger. Focused anger. For the first time, I stopped apologizing in my head for wanting the truth. I stopped feeling guilty for asking questions. I stopped shrinking myself to make others comfortable. That shift was subtle, but it changed everything. I met with my lawyer the next day and told him I was all in. No hesitation. No backing out. He looked at me carefully, like he wanted to make sure I understood what that meant. I did. What it meant was loneliness. What it meant was judgment. What it meant was standing firm when it would be easier to bend. And I was ready. As the case moved deeper, more cracks appeared. Witnesses spoke up. Not loudly, but honestly. Nurses, neighbors, old friends of my father. They didn't accuse my brother outright. They didn't need to. They simply told their truth. And those truths lined up in ways that couldn't be ignored. I watched my brother retreat further into himself. The confident man I grew up admiring was gone. In his place was someone defensive, guarded, afraid of losing control. That realization hurt more than I expected, because part of me still wanted him to be the brother I trusted. Still wanted him to admit he crossed a line. Still wanted him to say he was sorry. But life does not always give you the apology you deserve. Sometimes it gives you clarity instead. The emotional fall wasn't sudden. It was gradual. A slow shedding of illusions. A painful acceptance that love doesn't always protect you from harm. That family doesn't always choose fairness. That standing up for yourself can cost you people you never thought you'd lose. I started therapy around that time. I didn't tell anyone. I just knew I needed a place where I didn't have to be strong. Where I didn't have to explain or defend myself. Where I could say out loud that I missed my brother even while fighting him. Saying that was harder than anything else. Because missing someone who hurt you feels like betrayal of yourself. But it's human. Through those sessions, I began to understand something deeper. I wasn't just fighting for inheritance. I was fighting for my voice. For the right to be seen. For the part of me that spent years staying quiet to keep the peace. That part deserved better. As the months passed, the weight didn't disappear, but I grew stronger under it. I learned how to sit with discomfort. How to let judgment roll past me without sticking. How to remind myself why I started when doubt crept in. I kept thinking about something my father once said, long before he got sick. Doing the right thing doesn't always feel good, he told me. But it lets you sleep at night. Those words became my anchor. Standing alone cost me a lot. Relationships. Comfort. Familiar ground. But it also gave me something I didn't expect. Self-respect. And once I felt that, truly felt it, I knew I wasn't falling anymore. I was rising through the weight. There comes a point in every long fight when you stop feeling like you're moving forward and start feeling like you're being pulled backward through memories. That's where I was when the truth finally began to surface. Not all at once. Not in a dramatic reveal. But slowly, like fog lifting from a road you've been driving blind on for too long. The legal process had reached a stage where statements mattered more than assumptions. Where timelines were tested. Where details no one thought important suddenly became everything. I sat in meetings listening to people talk about my father's final years like they were solving a puzzle. It felt strange hearing his life reduced to patterns and capacity charts. But I stayed quiet. I listened. That had always been my strength. One afternoon, my lawyer called me and asked if I could come in early the next day. His voice was steady, but something about it felt different. Not urgent, just focused. I knew something had changed. When I arrived, he slid a folder across the table. Inside were medical notes we hadn't seen before. Evaluations from a specialist my father saw quietly, without telling many people. Notes about memory lapses, confusion during complex discussions, difficulty understanding long explanations. The dates lined up with the document changes. That moment landed heavy in my chest. Not because it surprised me, because it confirmed what I had been afraid to say out loud. My father wasn't fully himself when some of those decisions were made. I didn't feel victorious. I felt sad. Sad that my father had been vulnerable. Sad that someone close to him may have taken advantage of that vulnerability. Sad that the truth had to come out this way. The truth doesn't always feel like relief. Sometimes it feels like grief all over again. As the information was introduced formally, I watched reactions closely. Lawyers leaned in. Notes were taken. Questions were asked differently now. The tone shifted from skepticism to seriousness. This was no longer just a dispute between brothers. This was about capacity and influence. And that changes everything. My brother's confidence cracked that day. Not fully, but enough that I could see it. His answers became shorter, less polished. He leaned more on legal language than personal explanations. That told me something important. He was no longer speaking from certainty. He was defending a position. Later that week, another witness came forward. A former financial advisor my father had worked with years earlier. He remembered my dad clearly, remembered his caution, remembered how much he valued fairness between his sons. He also remembered a meeting where my brother did most of the talking, where my father seemed quiet, distracted, nodding along. No accusations, just observations. Those observations stacked up. Each one felt like a small stone placed carefully on a scale that had been tilted for too long. As more light came in, something unexpected happened. People started reaching out. Quietly, privately. Family members who had stayed silent began asking questions. Not taking sides, just asking. That shift felt subtle but powerful. Truth has a way of changing the temperature in a room without making noise. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel proud. I just felt steadier. Like I wasn't shouting into the wind anymore. Like the ground under my feet was finally solid. One night, after a particularly long day of depositions, I went for a drive. No destination, just movement. I passed familiar streets, old memories, places my father used to take us, hardware stores, diners, quiet back roads. I talked to him out loud like he was sitting beside me. I told him I missed him. I told him I hoped I was doing the right thing. I told him I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I was just trying to make sure his voice didn't disappear. That drive did something to me. It reminded me that this fight was never about winning. It was about honoring something real, something human. The moment everything truly shifted came during a mediation session. Long table, neutral room, everyone tired, everyone guarded. The mediator asked a simple question. What outcome feels fair? There was silence. My brother spoke first. He talked about responsibility, about sacrifice, about how much he had done, how much he had carried. His words were practiced, but there was strain underneath them. When it was my turn, I spoke slowly. I said fairness wasn't about numbers. It was about intention, about whether my father's wishes were truly understood, about whether anyone thought to ask if he was okay when decisions were being made. I said I didn't want to erase my brother's role. I just wanted acknowledgement that control had crossed into influence. The mediator nodded, and for the first time, my brother didn't argue. That moment stayed with me, because silence can mean many things. But in that room, it meant recognition. After that session, things moved differently. Offers were discussed, revisions considered. Nothing final, but movement, real movement. I went home that night and sat on my couch in the dark. Not drained, just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when something long held loosens its grip. I thought about how different this felt from the beginning. Back then, I was scared of speaking, scared of conflict, scared of losing family. Now, I realized something important. I had already lost what wasn't honest. What remained was truth. And truth has weight, but it also has balance. The truth coming into the light didn't fix everything. It didn't heal the relationship with my brother. It didn't bring my father back. But it did something just as important. It gave me peace with myself. I knew then that no matter how this ended, I had honored my father by refusing to let his silence be mistaken for consent. And that mattered. By the time we reached what everyone started calling the reckoning, I was tired in a way that sleep could not fix. Not drained, not burned out, just worn thin, like fabric that's been pulled too many times and is starting to fray at the edges. The fight had been long enough that it stopped feeling like a fight and started feeling like a test of who we really were when no one could hide anymore. The truth was mostly out in the open now. Not shouted. Not celebrated. Just present. Sitting there in black and white. In notes and statements and timelines that told a story nobody wanted to admit, but nobody could ignore. The question wasn't whether something wrong had happened anymore. The question was what we were going to do about it. That's where choice comes in. Choice is the hardest part of any reckoning. Because once the facts are clear, you can't blame confusion anymore. You can only decide who you want to be moving forward. My brother had choices. He could admit what he did. He could accept responsibility. He could help fix what had been twisted. Or he could double down, hold tighter, protect what he took, even if it meant burning what little trust remained. I knew him well enough to know which way he leaned when he felt cornered. Control had always been his comfort. The mediation sessions continued. Each one felt heavier than the last. Not because of tension, but because of fatigue. Everyone was tired of pretending, tired of spinning words, tired of carrying weight that didn't belong to them. I watched my brother closely during those sessions. The man who once filled rooms with confidence now sat stiff, arms crossed, jaw tight. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, his words were careful, defensive, measured. There was no warmth left. At one point, the mediator asked him directly if he believed our father fully understood the changes that were made. That question hung in the air. He didn't answer right away. I don't think I breathed during that silence. Finally, he said something that told me everything. I did what needed to be done. Not what Dad wanted. Not what was fair. What needed to be done. That sentence hit me harder than any accusation ever could. Because it revealed the core of the problem. My brother had replaced my father's wishes with his own judgment. He decided he knew better. He decided control mattered more than consent. He decided responsibility gave him permission. That's the price of control. It convinces you that your intentions justify your actions. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I just listened. The mediator pressed gently, asking if he would consider revisiting the distribution in light of the new information. My brother hesitated. Then he shook his head. That was his choice. I felt something shift inside me at that moment. Not anger. Not sadness. Acceptance. I realized then that no outcome would bring back the brother I once knew. Even if the case resolved in my favor, the relationship was already gone. Control had taken its toll. And control always demands payment. As the weeks passed, negotiations stalled. My brother refused to bend. Every proposal was met with resistance. Every attempt at compromise felt like pulling against a locked door. The pressure on him increased. Legal costs, social strain, quiet whispers in the family. People started seeing him differently. Not as the responsible one, but as the one who wouldn't let go. That isolation changed him. I could see it in the way he spoke, in the way his confidence turned sharp, defensive, almost brittle. Control looks strong from the outside, but it's fragile on the inside. It can't survive questioning. One evening, I got a call from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in months. She didn't accuse. She didn't take sides. She just asked how I was holding up. That simple question nearly broke me, because no one had asked me that in a long time. We talked quietly, carefully. She admitted she had believed my brother at first, that she thought I was being greedy. Then she saw the documents, heard the stories, felt the shift. I didn't know, she said. I'm sorry. I told her it was okay. And I meant it. People believe the stories that make them feel safe. I couldn't blame them for that. Around that time, my brother tried one last move. A settlement offer. Not fair. Not balanced. But framed like generosity. Like he was doing me a favor. I read it slowly. Twice. Then once more. It wasn't about resolution. It was about control disguised as compromise. I declined. That decision felt heavier than any other I had made. Because it closed the door on an easy ending. It meant the process would continue. That the strain would last longer. That the cost would grow. But it also meant I wasn't accepting scraps in exchange for silence. That mattered to me. I didn't tell many people about that choice. I didn't need validation. I needed alignment. I needed to know I could live with myself afterward. And I could. The reckoning wasn't loud. It didn't come with shouting or dramatic scenes. It came with quiet realizations. With doors closing gently but firmly. With understanding that some relationships don't survive truth. Not because truth is cruel, but because honesty demands accountability. My brother chose control. I chose clarity. Those choices carried consequences. For him, it meant standing alone with what he took, constantly defending it. For me, It meant walking forward without the weight of pretending. Neither path was easy, but only one felt honest. As this phase ended, I understood something deeply for the first time. Family is not just about shared blood. It's about shared responsibility. And when one person claims too much power, they lose the very thing they're trying to protect. Trust. That loss doesn't show up on paper, but it's permanent. By the time we reached the final turning point, I had stopped counting days. Time had become strange. Weeks felt like hours. Single moments stretched into something much heavier. The fight had settled into my bones, and I carried it everywhere, even when I tried not to. What surprised me most was how normal everything looked from the outside. People went to work. Stores stayed open. Life kept moving like nothing was happening. Inside me, though, everything felt paused. Like I was standing in a long hallway, waiting for a door to open, not knowing what would be on the other side. The final turning point didn't arrive with drama. It came quietly, through a phone call from my lawyer on a gray afternoon. He told me the court had reviewed everything. The medical records, the timelines, the witness statements, the patterns of influence. He spoke carefully, like someone handling something fragile. He said the court was leaning toward recognizing undue influence. That phrase landed slowly. Undue influence. It meant what I had been trying to say all along, but didn't know how to put into legal words. That my father's vulnerability had been used. That control had replaced consent. That fairness had been bent. I didn't feel relief. I felt tired. My lawyer explained what would likely happen next. Assets would be reassessed. Distributions adjusted. Some decisions reversed. Others renegotiated. It wasn't a full victory, but it was acknowledgement. Acknowledgement matters. When I hung up, I sat quietly for a long time. I thought about calling someone. Anyone. Then I realized there wasn't really anyone left to call. Not in the way there used to be. That realization hurt more than I expected. The next few days were heavy with waiting. Everyone knew something was coming. You could feel it in the conversations, in the careful tone of emails, in the way people avoided certainty. My brother didn't reach out. That silence told me more than words ever could. When the decision finally came through, it was written plainly. No emotion, no judgment, just facts and conclusions. It confirmed that my father's capacity had been compromised during key decisions. That influence had likely played a role. That adjustments were necessary. I read it slowly, line by line. This was what I had fought for. This was what I had lost so much for. And yet, there was no rush of victory. Just a deep, steady breath. The decision changed everything on paper. Accounts shifted. Property values reassigned. Numbers moved. The inheritance that had once been taken entirely now reflected something closer to fairness. But paper doesn't tell the whole story. Winning has a cost no one really talks about. The cost showed up in small ways. In the way family gatherings never felt the same again. In the way my phone stayed quiet on days it used to ring. In the way my brother became someone I used to know instead of someone I still did. I saw him once after the decision. Briefly. In public. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Everything that needed to be said had already been said in courtrooms, in quiet rooms, in long silences. He looked different. Not defeated. Just smaller somehow. Like control had finally slipped, and he didn't know who he was without it. That image stayed with me. People reached out afterward. Some congratulated me. Some said justice had been done. Some apologized for doubting me. I accepted their words, but I didn't celebrate. Because celebration felt wrong. This wasn't a win like people imagine. No cheering. No satisfaction. Just resolution. And resolution is quiet. I went back to my father's house one last time before it changed hands. I walked through the room slowly. Touched the walls. Sat on the porch where he used to watch the evening settle in. I talked to him again. Out loud. I told him what happened. I told him I hoped I did right by him. I told him I was sorry it came to this. The wind moved through the trees, and for a moment, everything felt still. The cost of winning wasn't just losing my brother. It was losing the idea that truth automatically heals. Sometimes it just clears the air enough for you to see what's already broken. But it also gave me something I didn't expect. Freedom. Freedom from doubt. Freedom from silence. Freedom from carrying someone else's version of the story. I learned that standing up for yourself doesn't always make life easier. But it makes it honest. And honesty, even when it hurts, gives you room to breathe. As I moved forward, I felt lighter in some ways, heavier in others. Grief and relief can exist at the same time. That's something no one really prepares you for. The final turning point didn't end the story. It just changed the direction. And sometimes, that's enough. When the battle ended, I expected something to rush in and take its place. Relief, joy, closure. Something loud enough to fill the space the fight had occupied for so long. Instead, what came was silence. A deep, unfamiliar silence that followed me everywhere, like an echo that hadn't decided what it wanted to be yet. For months, my life had been defined by motion. Calls to return, emails to read, meetings to prepare for, arguments to brace myself against. The fight gave my day structure, even when it drained me. When it ended, that structure vanished overnight. I woke up one morning and realized there was nothing I needed to check. No deadlines, no documents, no updates. Just a quiet room and a long day ahead of me. That should have felt like freedom. It felt like being lost. I didn't talk about it with anyone. People assumed I was fine now, that the hard part was over, that once justice was served, everything else would fall into place naturally. But life doesn't work that way. The silence wasn't peaceful at first. It was heavy. It forced me to sit with things I had been pushing aside. Grief, loneliness, the absence of my brother, the absence of my father, the absence of the person I used to be before all of this began. I started noticing how quiet my phone was. No constant back and forth. No updates. No arguments. Just stillness. I found myself checking it out of habit, like my body hadn't caught up with reality yet. Some nights, I missed the fight. Not because I wanted conflict, but because it gave me direction, purpose, a reason to wake up and push forward. Without it, I had to figure out who I was again. That turned out to be harder than I expected. I tried returning to old routines. Work, errands, small talk. Everything felt slightly off. Like I was wearing clothes that fit, but didn't feel like mine anymore. I had changed, even if no one else could see it. People asked how I was doing. I gave polite answers. I'm okay. Taking it day by day. Those words were true, but incomplete. What I didn't say was that I felt untethered. Like I had been holding onto a rope for so long that when I let go, my hands didn't know what to do. The silence forced reflection. And reflection doesn't always feel gentle. I replayed moments from the past. Conversations with my brother. Small signs I ignored. Times I stayed quiet when something felt wrong. I didn't beat myself up for it the way I used to. I just observed. Learned. That was new for me. I realized how much of my life I had spent avoiding conflict. Keeping peace. Letting things slide to maintain harmony. That habit had shaped me in ways I hadn't noticed until it failed me. Without the fight, I had to decide what kind of man I wanted to be going forward. One who avoided discomfort, or one who respected his own voice. That question sat with me for weeks. I started doing small things differently. Saying no when I meant no. Speaking up when something didn't sit right. Taking my time instead of rushing to accommodate others. None of it was dramatic, but it was honest. Honesty feels strange at first when you're not used to it. I spent more time alone, but not in the lonely way I feared. I took long walks. Drove without music. Let my thoughts wander without pushing them away. Sometimes memories came. Sometimes nothing did. Both were okay. One afternoon, I found an old box of my father's things I hadn't opened yet. Tools, notes, old photographs. I went through them slowly, carefully, like each item might break if handled too fast. There was a picture of me and my brother as kids, arms around each other, smiling without effort. I stared at it for a long time, not with anger, with sadness. I didn't hate my brother. I still don't. I hated what happened. I hated the choices he made. But hatred never took root. What I felt was mourning, for what we were, for what we could have been. Accepting that helped me move forward. The silence slowly changed character. It stopped feeling empty and started feeling spacious. Like room had been made for something new, even if I didn't know what yet. I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Not at my brother. Not at myself. Not even at the situation. Anger had burned itself out during the fight. What remained was understanding. Understanding doesn't excuse harm. It just releases you from carrying it. I began reconnecting with people on my own terms. Not the family who judged or disappeared, but friends who listened, who didn't rush me, who didn't expect neat conclusions. I learned how to sit with unanswered questions without needing to solve them. Some things don't resolve cleanly. Some relationships don't heal. Some endings don't feel finished. That's part of being human. Life after the battle didn't hand me happiness. It handed me responsibility. Responsibility for how I showed up, for how I spoke, for how I treated myself. I understood then that the fight had been necessary, but it wasn't the point. The point was who I became because of it. Stronger, yes. But more importantly, clearer. The silence wasn't my enemy anymore. It was my teacher. And it was teaching me how to live without fear of my own voice. After months of quiet, I started noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before. Small things. Ordinary things. The way the sun hits the kitchen window in the morning, how coffee smells when it's freshly brewed, the sound of leaves brushing against the sidewalk outside. Life had a rhythm again, but it was different. Slower. Softer. More deliberate. I realized that in all the chaos, the fights, the legal battles, the unspoken anger, I had been moving so fast that I barely noticed the world around me. I hadn't been living. I had been surviving. And now, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe without carrying the weight of everyone else's decisions. The silence that followed the settlement forced me into reflection. I didn't run from my thoughts anymore. I let them come, one by one, without judgment. I thought about my father constantly, about the man he was, the mistakes he had made, and the wisdom he had left behind. I thought about my brother and the choices he had made. And I thought about myself, the man I had become through all of it. Reflection isn't always comforting. Some days, it brought tears. Some nights, I would lie awake remembering conversations, moments where I could have acted differently, or where I could have spoken sooner. It was hard work, facing yourself like that. But the more I faced it, the lighter it felt. Every regret acknowledged, every misstep remembered, every grief felt. They all became part of the process. They didn't disappear, but they stopped controlling me. I started keeping a journal, not to document the legal battle or to write about my brother, but to write about what I was feeling in the quiet. The journal didn't have structure or rules. I wrote when I wanted. I wrote what I wanted. Sometimes it was anger, sometimes sadness, sometimes gratitude. Writing gave me space to process, to recognize patterns in my own thoughts, to untangle the knots that had formed over years of avoiding conflict. One evening, I read something I had written weeks before. I had scrawled, "I don't know if I'll ever feel normal again. Maybe I never will, but I want to try." At the time, it had felt like desperation. Now, I read it and realized it was the beginning of acceptance. Acceptance doesn't mean everything is okay. It doesn't mean the fight didn't cost you, but it means you're willing to keep moving forward anyway. I began spending more time outside, walking through neighborhoods I had grown up in. Streets that once felt familiar suddenly felt different. I noticed details I hadn't before. People smiling as they walked by, dogs running freely in yards, children playing. It felt like life was slowly reminding me that it didn't stop just because my world had been shaken. I also started reconnecting with parts of myself I had ignored for years. Hobbies I had abandoned, music I had stopped listening to, books I had never finished. I found joy in small accomplishments, finishing a chapter, cooking a new meal, taking a photo of the sunset. These things didn't erase the past, but they reminded me that life continues, and that I could still create moments of meaning. Family still felt complicated. My brother and I didn't talk. I accepted that. There was no reconciliation yet, and I didn't force it. I realized that relationships don't heal just because legal matters are settled. Some wounds take years to close, if they ever do. And that was okay. Acceptance doesn't require agreement, just understanding. Over time, I started noticing subtle shifts in myself. Patience, empathy, self-respect. Not the brash, loud confidence of winning a fight, but the quiet, steady awareness that I could stand up for myself without compromising my values. I realized that this peace, this stability, came not from changing anyone else, but from changing my own perspective. I also learned that life has its own timing. Lessons don't always come when you want them to. Peace doesn't arrive immediately after conflict. Understanding arrives slowly, in small increments, often in moments you don't recognize until later. I found that unexpected peace often comes not in celebrations, but in quiet realizations. The deep breath after weeks of tension, the smile when sunlight touches your face unexpectedly, the calm of knowing you've done what you could, even if the world doesn't notice. I began mentoring younger people at work and in my community. Not in a grand, formal way, just listening, offering guidance when asked, sharing what I had learned about responsibility, honesty, and resilience. Teaching others reminded me that even difficult experiences have value when they shape the person you become. Pain, conflict, and loss can teach lessons no textbook ever could. Most importantly, I learned to accept the duality of life. Joy and sorrow exist together. Strength and vulnerability coexist. Family can hurt and love simultaneously. You can feel loss and gratitude at the same time. Recognizing this didn't make things easier, but it made them real. And real is better than pretending. I still think about my father every day. I still wonder what he would say about the choices we made. I still feel a tug when I see reminders of the family we once were. But the lessons remain. Honesty matters more than convenience. Standing up for yourself doesn't make you selfish. Silence is a choice, and sometimes the hardest voice to hear is your own. The long reflection gave me something I hadn't anticipated. It gave me a sense of self that was separate from conflict, separate from expectation, separate from family dynamics. I realized that my life could be measured not by what I inherited, not by what I lost, but by how I chose to live in the aftermath, how I chose to treat myself, and how I chose to carry the lessons forward. The unexpected peace wasn't dramatic. It didn't feel earned in a visible way, but it was steady, deep, and undeniable. It was the calm that comes after storms, the quiet inside that allows you to breathe, to plan, to hope, and to feel again without fear. And slowly, I learned that this peace, this clarity, this awareness, was its own form of victory. Not over my brother, not over anyone else, but over the part of life that wants to trap you in silence, fear, and resentment. That victory was mine, quietly, patiently, and finally. Facing the future after everything that had happened was like stepping onto a bridge I hadn't noticed before. It was unfamiliar, narrow, and a little wobbly in spots, but it held me. I realized the battle with my brother and the legal fight had shaped me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I was different now, not just in understanding the past, but in seeing how I could live going forward. The first challenge of facing the future was understanding that relationships take work, but not all of them could be repaired. My brother remained distant. He didn't reach out, and I didn't force him to. I accepted that for some people, their choices create barriers that don't always come down, even after truth is revealed. Acceptance of that fact was the first lesson that truly stuck. I focused on rebuilding other relationships instead. Old friends who had drifted away during the chaos, people who had been quiet observers, colleagues who had respected my integrity, they became anchors. I realized that family isn't only blood. It's also the people who show up when life gets messy, who listen without judgment, and who remind you that you're not alone. One of the first things I did was reach out to my cousins and extended family who had been quietly watching. Some of them apologized for doubting me. Others shared stories of my father I hadn't heard before. Each conversation reminded me that even in the midst of conflict, connections could survive, but only if approached with honesty, patience, and care. I also began reflecting on the patterns that had led us here. My brother's need for control, my initial silence, my own avoidance of confrontation. All of these pieces formed a puzzle. Understanding them didn't change the past, but it gave me insight into how to navigate life differently. I realized that boundaries matter, communication matters, and speaking your truth early can prevent years of unnecessary pain. I started creating routines that grounded me. Simple things, really. Daily walks, journaling in the morning, cooking meals without rushing, and spending evenings reading or listening to music that helped me reflect. These routines gave me structure without pressure. They reminded me that life is not just about resolving conflict. It's about cultivating peace in the ordinary moments, too. Unexpectedly, I discovered strength I didn't know I had. Strength that came not from confrontation, but from restraint. Strength that came not from winning, but from choosing integrity. Strength that came from staying true to myself when the world expected me to bend, to ignore, or to compromise for convenience. That strength became my compass. I also began helping others. Not in a dramatic, public sense. Quietly. Offering advice when someone struggled with family issues. Listening to stories of betrayal, conflict, and misunderstanding. Sometimes sharing my own. I realized that my experience, as painful as it had been, could serve as a guide for others who were standing at their own crossroads. This became a form of healing, both for me and for the people I touched. Financially, the settlement allowed me to take steps I had long postponed. But I didn't focus on money. I focused on freedom. Freedom to make choices without fear. Freedom to prioritize relationships that mattered. freedom to define my own sense of responsibility. Money was a tool, not a goal. That perspective was new for me, and it shifted everything. I also began thinking more intentionally about the kind of father I wanted to be. I have children, and I wanted them to grow up understanding fairness, honesty, and the value of speaking their truth. I shared stories of my father's wisdom, the lessons I learned from the legal fight, and the importance of integrity. I realized that one of the most lasting legacies we leave isn't money or property. It's the values we model and the clarity with which we live our lives. Over time, my perspective on my brothers softened, not in forgiveness, necessarily, but in understanding. Control is a burden as much as it is a shield. People make choices based on fear, habit, and desire to feel secure. Recognizing that allowed me to release resentment without excusing the harm. It also allowed me to step forward with less anger and more compassion for myself and for him. I discovered that rebuilding relationships takes patience. Small gestures matter. A phone call, a message, a shared meal. I started reconnecting with distant relatives, old friends, and colleagues in a deliberate, gentle way. No expectations, no pressure, just human connection. Each one strengthened my sense of belonging and reminded me that isolation is a choice, not always a punishment. One of the biggest lessons I learned was that silence can be both destructive and healing. In the fight, silence had been weaponized against me. In recovery, silence became a tool for reflection and peace. I learned when to speak, when to hold back, and when to let actions, not words, define outcomes. That distinction made life feel more manageable, more intentional, and more honest. I also learned to celebrate small victories. A clear morning, a kind word, a quiet evening, the ability to face a difficult family gathering without tension, the courage to set boundaries without guilt. These were the milestones of my life now. They weren't flashy, but they were real. They mattered. They built resilience that would carry me into the future. Facing the future wasn't about predicting what would happen. It was about embracing the uncertainty and living in alignment with my values. I realized that life doesn't hand out guarantees, but it does offer opportunities to act with integrity, to preserve dignity, and to nurture relationships that are worth nurturing. I started thinking differently about legacy. Not the legacy of inheritance or possessions, but the legacy of presence, honesty, and quiet strength. I wanted my children to remember integrity more than any material thing. I wanted people to see that even when life is complicated, the right choices, difficult as they may be, define the person you become. Months passed. Seasons changed. I watched the world continue around me, and I felt more grounded in it. I wasn't waiting for anyone else to fix what had been broken. I wasn't trying to change the past. I was simply living, with intention, reflection, and care. The lessons that stuck were simple, yet profound. Speak your truth. Honor what matters. Stand firm when integrity is challenged. Accept what cannot be changed. Release resentment when it no longer serves you. And, most importantly, live a life that reflects your values, not the expectations of others. In that process, I discovered a peace I hadn't expected. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady, quiet, human. A peace that comes not from victory over others, but from victory over fear, doubt, and the weight of unresolved conflict. That peace became the foundation for every choice I made moving forward. I realized that life after the storm is never about erasing what happened. It's about understanding it, learning from it, and carrying those lessons forward in a way that strengthens your future. That understanding changed me. It shaped how I viewed family, relationships, and the world around me. And slowly, quietly, I began to feel whole again. Not perfect, not naive, but grounded, connected, aware of my own strength, aware of my responsibility, aware that, even when the past hurts, the future can be built with intention, honesty, and care. The last part of this journey wasn't marked by drama, shouting, or courtroom victories. It was marked by quiet reflection. I found myself sitting in my living room one evening, the sun low in the sky, golden light spilling across the furniture, and I realized how far I had come, how heavy the burden once was, and how much lighter life felt now, even with scars that would never fully fade. I thought about my father, about the man who had shaped me in ways both obvious and subtle. His words, his actions, even his silence. All of it had carried lessons I didn't fully understand until I walked through the storm he left behind. I remembered his voice telling me that honesty mattered more than comfort, that respect couldn't be demanded, it had to be earned, and that standing up for what was right sometimes felt lonely, but it was always worth it. I thought about my brother, about the choices he made, the control he sought, and the distance it created. I realized that holding anger or resentment toward him would only weigh me down further. He had made his choices, and I had made mine. That realization freed me in a way nothing else could. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. It sometimes just means releasing the grip of what hurts you so you can move forward. The family gatherings that once felt tense now felt calmer. I approached them with intention, patience, and boundaries. I no longer expected everyone to behave perfectly, and I no longer felt responsible for controlling how others responded. I learned that respect is mutual, and that protecting my own integrity is a responsibility I owe to myself, not just to others. I found that peace isn't something that arrives suddenly. It grows quietly, in small steps, in tiny victories of self-awareness, honesty, and understanding. Waking up and choosing patience instead of irritation. Choosing to speak kindly even when it's hard. Choosing to step away from conflict when it's unnecessary. These small choices became the foundation for my life now. I started mentoring younger colleagues at work, not in a grand, authoritative way, but simply by listening. Sharing the lessons I had learned, that integrity matters more than convenience, that standing up for yourself doesn't make you selfish, and that clarity and honesty are far more valuable than approval. I saw them benefit, not because I had all the answers, but because I shared what I had learned the hard way. I also reconnected with friends who had drifted during the conflict. I realized that relationships don't have to be perfect to be meaningful. Some people stay, some leave, some come back, and some remain distant. Accepting that without bitterness allowed me to embrace the people who chose to be present and let go of those who didn't. Financially, life stabilized. But the real value wasn't in the assets or the settlement. It was in the lessons about responsibility, boundaries, and trust. I realized that inheritance and money are fleeting. They can be taken or given, but the principles we live by define who we are long after numbers on paper have faded. The fight had forced me to examine myself in ways I never expected. I realized how much of my life I had spent avoiding confrontation, keeping peace at the expense of honesty, and shrinking my voice to make others comfortable. That pattern could have continued indefinitely if I hadn't faced it. Now, I spoke my truth carefully but firmly, respected my boundaries, and carried myself with a quiet confidence that was entirely my own. I learned that strength isn't about domination. It isn't about winning arguments or controlling outcomes. True strength is about clarity, compassion, and resilience. It's about choosing integrity over convenience, even when it costs you comfort. It's about honoring yourself and the people you love, without letting fear dictate your choices. I also discovered the importance of small, everyday rituals. Morning coffee with silence. Walks without distraction. Journaling thoughts and reflections. Moments of gratitude. These small practices became anchors in my life, reminding me that even after turbulence, peace is possible if you nurture it intentionally. Perhaps the most profound lesson I learned is that life is not about avoiding pain. It's about moving through it. Pain teaches patience. Pain teaches empathy. Pain teaches perspective. It doesn't make life easier, but it makes life richer. And richer in understanding, compassion, and self-awareness. I thought about my children, the lessons I wanted to pass on. I realized that the most important inheritance I could give them wasn't money or possessions. It was example, showing them that honesty matters, that integrity matters, that standing up for yourself is not just acceptable, it's necessary, that even in family, where love is complicated, respect and fairness are essential. I learned to embrace the duality of life. Joy and sorrow coexist. Success and failure coexist. Love and disappointment coexist. Understanding this duality didn't erase the pain of the past, but it allowed me to live fully in the present. It allowed me to appreciate the good, endure the difficult, and approach life with humility and gratitude. Looking back, I understood that every moment, the loss, the betrayal, the fight, the reconciliation, and the quiet reflection was part of a journey that shaped me, not into someone perfect, but into someone aware. someone resilient, someone capable of holding peace in one hand and honesty in the other. The final reflection brought clarity. Life isn't measured by what we control or take, but by how we navigate the moments we cannot control. It's measured by the courage to face truth, the willingness to act with integrity, and the ability to embrace both love and loss without being destroyed by either. As I moved forward, I carried these lessons quietly but firmly. I smiled at ordinary moments. I listened more. I spoke when necessary. I forgave silently. I set boundaries firmly. I nurtured relationships carefully. And most importantly, I honored my own voice, knowing it mattered even when others disagreed. The peace I finally found wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't the kind of victory others notice. It was quiet, deep, human, steady, real. It was the culmination of every hardship, every fight, every tear, and every reflection. And in that peace, I realized something simple, yet profound. Life is not about perfect endings. It's about living honestly, learning continuously, and moving forward with integrity, no matter how complicated the past may have been. I am still learning. I am still reflecting. But now, I face each day with clarity, compassion, and purpose. And that, I have discovered, is worth more than any inheritance, any victory, or any reconciliation. It is enough.